Hi there. It is a dark and rainy day here. I don't even think the lights will help. I want to talk about something that's very important to keep in mind when we're dealing with conflict and trying to improve our abilities to resolve and prevent it. And that has nothing to do with your mind, but it's the fact that conflict lives in our bodies as well as our minds. And how do we manage that? And how do we support our bodies through conflict for ourselves and with each other? So what does that look like, conflict being in our bodies? It can be very obvious sometimes. Of course, violent action would be an example of conflict being in our bodies and coming out of our bodies. So it can be in our bodies and then be expressed in various ways. Violence being the most extreme, but shaking, even a certain kind of stillness could seem almost eerie that someone's so still when you're in the midst of conflict with them. Lots of other ways that are unique to each individual. It could be that someone experiences a really dry mouth when they're really upset. And so they find it hard to speak because physically it's a challenge to be getting the words out of the mouth. So there are lots of ways that it shows up. And the physiological source of that is a couple of primary hormones, what we call the stress hormones. So adrenaline and cortisol. And when you get upset, also when you get startled or fearful, but even when we're in conflict and we know we're not surprised and we're in the midst of it, our bodies respond with these stress hormones. And these stress hormones function in us in conflict in the same way that they do if we are being suddenly startled and suddenly fearful for our lives. And they put us into that, we've all heard this before, fight or flight. There's also freeze. So fight, flight, or freeze. And what's happening there is these hormones are coursing through our veins and going to the places they're needed for physical survival. So if we need to fight or if we need to run, then we need everything to be focused on our extremities and our muscles. So not necessarily on our analytical, softly thinking minds. Certainly there's decision making that happens, but it's very much survival oriented, and often we won't even remember, in serious situations, we won't even remember the decisions we made in the midst of a scary or fighting for our lives kind of scenario. But in conflict, the same kind of thing is happening. Sometimes at a lesser level, sometimes at that kind of peak level that shuts us down or causes us to physically lash out, or any of those more obvious signs. And so we don't want that to happen. And certainly we know that we need calm to resolve conflict, but you can't contrive calm, and you can't force calm, and you can't physically fight for calm. And yet, something that is needed is the expression, the release of what's built up in our bodies if we're having that kind of physiological response. So we need to release whatever the energy is, and so that then the hormones will calm down and we can calm down along with them. And so we have to find ways to do that. And in particular, we have to find ways to achieve and maintain that even prior to any conflict situation. So improving our baseline of calm by certain practices that we find for ourselves that work for us can be really helpful in that. And it's really important that when we are in the middle of conflict and we feel something rising up in us where we're shutting down or we feel like lashing out or we need to move, meaning perhaps we need to leave the room, that we find ways to honor those things that don't hurt anybody else. And that if we see that in someone else, that we try to give them what they need in order to be able to release theirs. So their physiological tensions. So giving them space, asking them to go for a walk, allowing them an outburst, because an outburst is a release. So yes, we can spiral up, and an outburst can go on for too long and seriously escalate everything. But sometimes it's just a matter of getting through your own outburst or someone else's to get to some physical calm and then some mental calm, so that you can then get on with it. A decent conversation that can lead you down the path of resolution. So again, it's really important to recognize that conflict is happening in our bodies as well as in our minds. And it can feel very subtle. It can look very subtle if we're observing someone else, but it's still part of the experience of conflict. And it needs to be addressed as much as any of the other mental needs, environmental needs, needs of the substance of needs that to be addressed regarding the substance of the conflict. They're all important. They all require our attention. Does anybody else dislike the sound of people eating and drinking as much as I do? I'm sure the mic picked that up. Okay, so if we're trying to nurture our skills in conflict prevention and conflict resolution, and we know that we're this entire complex organism, which is both a mind and a body full of hormones, what are some things that we can do to achieve calm, to increase or enhance our baseline of calm, and to release in the moment anything that might be ramping up in us? So it takes some trial and error, sometimes a lot of trial and error, finding personal practices that work for you and a combination thereof that works for you, which again, it's not going to be the exact same combination that works for anybody else. So does something like having quiet time every morning help you have a clear mind, have a greater baseline of calm, and have greater muscle memory for calm, so that when you are in the midst of conflict and you feel something rising up, you can recognize it, and just recognizing it and acknowledging it in the moment can be enough to release it, to get back to calm, to move on with the conversation. Or you can recognize it in the moment and then ask for what you need. So if we're looking back and thinking about fight, flight, or freeze, if any of those are our inclinations, if flight is your inclination, just saying, I want to come back, I want to talk about this, I want to resolve this, I'm just going to go for a walk first. And then you get to flee and release it that way. And also just the movement of walking, that can release the fight part, if that's the kind of energy that's rising up in you. So just saying, I'll come back, being plain about our intentions. I'm going to come back, but right now I just need to go for a 10-minute walk and get this out of me and clear my head. And if you're feeling shut down, movement again can be helpful. So those are in the moment, but then practicing these things at other times can help us be better in the moment, be better at recognizing, at tending to, at nipping things in the bud, at not letting that energy and those hormones get out of control. So quiet time, whatever works for you. The great physical releases of sports or other movement, those achieve the same thing. So just finding what works. Could be related to music. There are too many examples to mention, but taking some time and trying out some things and seeing if they help you to enhance your calm and to enhance your ability, even when upset, to recognize what's happening, recognizing your needs in the moment, perhaps recognizing someone else's needs in the moment and offering them what they need, or encouraging them to take and do what they need before you try to get back to resolving whatever it is that's going on between you. That can be the best way, the most effective way, or ways to make sure that we're tending to the aspect of conflict that's living in our bodies. I hope that helps. I'll see you next time.